Okay, so we're still, on Rabbi Hirsh and Benny Sky. I want to thank Rabbi Pinkas for allowing me to give this year in this yeshiva. And the purpose of this year is to really look at in depth the teachings of Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch and his sefer called Horeb. And the sefer itself was written in the 19th century, and it was a time where there was a lot of different philosophical approaches, in Europe, much of which led by the philosopher Immanuel Kant and a lot of his philosophies. And many of the Jews of that time were, influenced by the many of the different philosophical approaches that were going on in Germany. And so Rabbi Hirsch, wanting Jews not to leave, their traditions, their purpose in this world, many of these Jews of that time, were influenced. And so it prompted him to write this book, Horeb, which is a way to not necessarily debunk philosophy, but as it was a way to contextualize philosophical language for the people or the Jews at that time to be able to see how their philosophy is the greatest philosophy. The Torah philosophy is the greatest philosophy and a catalyst for, humanity. So I think we're on our 7th class, and we are touching on we touched on many different areas, but in our last year we talked about this idea of how Hashem created the world. Oh, and also in this year we do Halakhot of the Ben Ish Chai. Ben Ish Chai was also born. He was born in the 1800s, but he was born on the other side of the world, in Iraq. Now Iraq, Baghdad, and he was a chief rabbi there, and he was known as one of the great Kabbalists, one of the great spiritual thinkers, of that time. So we learn a halakhot, a halakha every shir, and we try to tie it into what we learned from Rabbi Hirsch. In its own way, it's a celebration of Jewish wisdom and seeing Jewish wisdom and Jewish ideas as being one. So with that being said, what we learned last week was that the human being has a soul, and the soul that the human being has, God gave us tools to allow that soul and the body to be able to connect to, Hashem's light. And this ability to connect to the light force of Hashem is what fuels us as people, is what gives us the strength, the inspiration to think. No, it's good. It gives us the ability to think and to comprehend and to just basically maximize our human potential, to be able to express our greatest potentials. And one of the things we learned in the past shirim is how Rabbi Hirsch describes Shabbat, and he describes Shabbat as an education mechanism for humanity as to life, our purpose here, the responsibility we have as human beings, how God is the ruler of this world, and basically that Shabbat is a reminder that God is the ruler and nature is subordinate to us, meaning we have an influence, we have a power over nature. We can take trees and we can build houses. We could take animals and turn them into food. We could take the skin of animals and create clothing. We can take rocks and we can build buildings. And so Rabbi Hirsch asked the question, what protects nature from humanity? What protects fellow man from humanity when man, unlike nature, was given this free will to do whatever it wants? It's free of any compulsion. So it was able to do whatever it wants. And so unlike nature, this free will could be problematic if it's not checked. And so Rabbi Hirsch says one of the educational tools to remind us of that responsibility is Shabbat. So going further, we went last week's share, and we talked about, or yesterday's share, we talked about the system of how God expresses itself, how God gives us a system on how to deal with this responsibility that we were given. And so that responsibility that we were given is given to us in a frame of laws. But those laws are not just laws as you see in America or in Israel or anywhere else in the world, where the laws are there to create a functioning society, as our laws allow us to connect to the divine light, the divine energy, the divine spirituality that exists inside of all of creation. And so the way that those laws are expressed is through 613 laws. And those 613 laws are broken into 4 categories. As we talked about yesterday, Mishpatim, Hukim, and Mitzvot. So you have to see last week's share to get a broad overlook on those 3 categories. But today, we're going to talk about the laws of Mishpatim a little bit more in depth. And the reason why it's important to go in depth and to understand these concepts is because this is part of the purpose of why we are given life. We were given life to become, in essence, a blessing to God's creation. And so, as we learned last week, the laws of Mishpatim and the laws of Hukim allow us to not become a curse, a force of negativity, but the laws of Mitzvot allow us to be a blessing. So, with that being said, what is Mishpatim? What is this idea of Mishpatim? Mishpatim, there's actually a parsha in the Torah called Mishpatim, and this parsha it comes right after Mount Sinai, after the Jews received the Torah on Mount Sinai, and God starts to give the laws on how to interact with each other, how to interact with our fellow man. So the laws of Mishpatim are really the laws with our fellow man. How we deal with our fellow man, how we communicate with our fellow man, how we deal with the different issues. For example, the laws of Mishpatim, they deal with, how the respect for human body, right? The respect for human body. It talks about the prohibitions of murder. It talks about how to deal with injuries, how to deal with other people's properties, how to deal with property that's stolen, how to deal with people who have possessions, how to deal with damages caused damages caused to property by physical force, how to deal with people lying and falsehood, how to deal with flattery, how to deal with hypocrisy, how to deal with mental health. All these different issues, Hashem took those into account because God created us. Every way that mankind is deficient is because God made us deficient in that way, and he created a law that allows us to correct that deficiency. So he created us with this ability to not be truthful at times. God gave us laws and rules on how to correct that. God gave us this desire to maybe steal, or the desire to take advantage, or to use things improperly. He created that deficiency. So that deficiency that we have was given to us by God, and that deficiency it can only be corrected by following God's law in this particular area, right? So that's an important thing. But to really get a full grasp of Mishpatim and the importance of it, we have to go very deep. And when we say very deep, this is some nice ginger ale given to us by Rabbi Zakaria. To understand the depth of what we're talking about, we have to go all the way back before your soul came into this world. And so the Torah tells us, the Kabbalists teach us that every soul comes into this world for a specific correction. That's why we come into this world. We come in this world for a specific correction, and that specific correction is what is going to allow our soul to become completely connected to God. So if you could imagine having a snowball, right? And this snowball is, for whatever reason, the side of it, it's not a full circle, it's just a part of it is not fully there. Maybe it fell off, maybe, maybe some of it melted, whatever. But the point is the same, it's not a full circle. So the idea is you take that snowball and you put it in the ground and you roll it around. And as it rolls around, it picks up other forms of snow until it becomes this completed circle, right? It becomes this completed circle. And so the point, or the idea is saying, this is kind of like our life. This is our soul. Our soul comes in incomplete. It comes in missing parts. It comes in, in some places, maybe even broken. And so the idea is to say that the life that God has given us allows us to complete or correct or fulfill the parts of our soul that's missing. So the world that you come into, the parents that you have, or maybe you lack of parents, the neighborhood that you were born in, the generation that you were born in, the social issues that are going on politically at that time, how education is delivered at that time, how economics are, all this whole setting that you came into the world, the people that you meet, the whole setting, everything that you come into this world to deal with or you experience is part of this perfect synthesis of reality that allows your soul to achieve its correction, right? So just pause on that thought for a second and think about it. The life that I was given, everything that I experienced in my life was given to me by God in order for me to fulfill my purpose and achieve my ultimate correction in his lifetime, right? So with that being said, how do I deal with this life? How do I see God within all these experiences? Because I've had moments where my heart has been broken. I've had moments when I've had great success. I've had moments where people have turned their back on me. I've had moments where people disappointed me. I've seen terrible things done by my community or other communities done to my community. I've seen, war, violence, problems in my parents' life, the problems in my neighbors and cousins and relatives. How does all of this fit in to the world that I came in on? How does this all fit into that? Because answering these questions will bring a person a tremendous amount of peace. Because the Torah teaches us that everything we experience is good. Everything is tov. Everything is good. Everything that happens, you should say Baruch Hashem. So how could that be reality? How could that be reality when I experienced major disappointment in my life? How could that be reality when I've seen terrible things happen to people? How could I see something terrible happen? A person loses a life, a person loses, bad health, a person, just sees something that's really painful and traumatizing. How could that be good? For the very reason why I just stated. Hashem creates a world that we come into, and that world is there to help us correct our soul. So if I came into a world that was different, say, you see me, I would say I'm a Black person, I'm African-American, whatever the term is you want to use. If I came into this world as a Chinese person, the soul that I have inside this body would not be able to achieve its correction. Okay. If I had different parents than I have, my life I wouldn't be able to achieve my correction. If I grew up in a different neighborhood, say I come in this world Black, but I grew up in Australia, the conditions of where I grew up in America was a catalyst and conduit for me to achieve my correction. So the point is saying that this idea of the life that we have is a blessing when you look at it from the standpoint that the life we were given is a model or a module or a set of experiences to correct our soul. That's it. This is life. And so how do we correct our soul in this lifetime? If I experience this, if I experience these different things, what do I do to allow myself to experience what God has given me in the highest level, to express my full potential in this lifetime, to, as they say, get the job done? How do I do that? These are the laws of the Torah. The laws of the Torah is what allows us one second. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So just a recap. just to recap. Hold on 1 second. Pause for a second. Okay, so this is the idea. So if we don't see our life as a place of correction, if we don't see the life that we were given as a gift from Hashem, meaning that every experience that I had in my life was given to me as a way to correct my soul, right? My soul comes into this world for a correction. And so the family that I chose, the environment that I grew up in, the experiences that I had growing up, everything was a building block to my correction in this lifetime. And so to maximize that experience and to make sure that we did not miss out on the opportunities that God has given us, he's giving us a spiritual system called the 613 mitzvot. And as we talked about, it's broken up into 3 categories, but the idea of Mishpatim is how we deal with our fellow man. How we deal with our fellow man. And that understanding and that clarity of how we deal with our fellow man is the building block to dealing with the rest of creation. Because only through the love for my fellow man, the love for my brother, the love for my sister, can I achieve true love for nature, true love for God, because everything that we experience is God's creation. So Rabbi Hirsh says that the idea, the base concept of understanding the laws of Mishpatim is justice. Justice is the basis. So how does he understand justice? He said the concept of justice is for your conduct. What the concept of the unity of God is for your mind. As the latter forms the basis of your thoughts, so the former is the basis of all of your enjoyment and actions. Indeed, the concept of justice as your life task is a direct consequence of the concept of the unity of God. So he's saying the idea of justice is like this. If I'm saying that God created creation and God created all the entities around me, and everything has a spark of God inside of it. Every person on planet Earth has a spark of God. Every nation has a spark of God inside of them. From that basis, that allows me to connect to this idea of the unity of God. And he says, it follows directly as soon as you apply yourself into all that exists, the concept of the one God in yourself. And he says, and he's basically saying that in order to be just, you have to have a holistic approach to reality. You have to have an in-depth analysis of the depth of the fact that the animals have a spiritual correction as well. That the plants have a spiritual correction as well, not just humans. Even the rocks that exist on this world have a spiritual correction. So it's okay. And so all of that, all of these different levels of existence, thank you. All these levels of spiritual existence have a true spiritual purpose in this world. And so when I want to apply justice, and it's one of the things actually we're learning in the Shir here at Bastina Kadisha, is how to properly apply justice to the world, how to properly see the proper way of giving kindness, what is the best way to create restriction, how to bring those things together, how to express this idea of netzach, this strength to go forward. How do we understand the clairvoyance and the deep insight of Horeb in bringing prosperity to the people in the proper way? How to connect this idea of the spiritual world and the physical world through this level of Yesod, and then how to manifest all these things in our life through this idea of kingship, of Malchut. This is the idea. So Rabbi Hirsh is giving us an outlook on he says justice. He says, and so when he's talking about this idea of the unity of God, he's basically speaking about being able to live a life where you are connected to all living human beings in all aspects of nature. And the decisions that you make in your life have to encompass this reality. You can't see yourself as a soul entity. You can't see yourself as a master of this world. You have to see yourself as a humble servant of Hashem. And by doing that, you'll be able to apply justice. So, but how do I know? How do I know if I'm doing the right thing or if I'm doing the wrong thing? This is the laws of Mishpatim, in dealing with our fellow man. This is dealing with the laws of Mishpatim. And so, as we said earlier, Mishpatim focuses on many different aspects. But one of the main points I'm going to focus on in this conversation to share, and then we're going to, finish it, relatively, early, because we've been doing like 2-hour-long shares and type of things, is this idea of respect for the human body. Because this perception of ego teaches us this concept of mine and me. And that idea of mine and me is one of the most blinding concepts in Torah. And the biggest concept of mine and me is expressed through our relationship with the human body. We feel that we can do whatever we want with our body because we have free will, and it's my body, right? This is my body, and that person's body is over there, and that person's body over there, and that's it. And not only is it about my body, I don't even have rules as it relates to other people's bodies, right? I don't even know how to deal with other people. That's why there's physical violence. That's why there's people gets murdered. That's why there's people that's beaten, violence, these whole types of things. And so Hashem, to that point, had to create a law to say, thou shalt not murder. Like you would think, why would we even, it should be common sense for us to be able to understand, excuse me, that should be common sense for us to understand that we should murder someone else, that we shouldn't steal from someone else. But the ego that blinds us to this reality will convince us with this. So, you okay? Okay. So, what? You need the link? Okay. So anyways, so the point is like this. So this idea of seeing our own body as an instrument given to us by God brings us to the idea of having good health, of eating properly, of exercising, of being clean, of being, in environments that are clean. All these different dynamics are connected to the fact that this is something that God gave me. If someone allowed me to borrow their car and say it was a nice car, it was a fancy car, it was almost pretty much brand new, and I had to give it back to them, the right thing to do was to make sure that the car stayed clean. And before I gave it back to them, make sure it was washed, it was prepared, it was waxed, it was in perfect condition. That's the same thing with our body. We have to see ourselves from the standpoint of, I have a soul, and I have a body, and this soul that I have can only, the soul that I have can only fully express itself by being in a body, in a goof that is properly prepared and taken care of. And this is one of the first laws of dealing with Mishpatim. Because if I see my body as a holy place, and I see my body as an instrument to service God, that means that I've now created the thinking in my mind that so are other people's bodies. Because Rabbi Hirsh, he says like this, he's talking about the human body. He says, when God gave the sons of Noach beasts as well as plants to eat, and thus permitting the killing of animals, he said that all blood which sustains human life will be avenged.
אין מים. לא, סתום, יש פה אבן, אני רוצה לפתוח, להוציא אותה, לא מצליח לפתוח.
Okay, so basically this idea of saying, okay, so he says, when God gave the sons of Noach beasts as well as plants as well as plants to eat, and thus permitting the killing of animals. He said that all the blood which sustains human life will be avenged, even that of beasts which kills a man, let alone of a man whose brother he was, for God created man in his image. And so he says, God gave creatures on earth to man for him to transform, to use as a means for his purpose, since, as it were, he had created them for the service of man, but in man himself, even in his body, you must respect the divine spirit that God has breathed into him, so that he may be in illumination of God's illumination of God disposed of his body in life on earth according to God's will. You must not deprive this divine spirit in man of thus its bodily frame and bodily belongings to his spirit. And just as it turns, just as it will turn, it will return back to God. So this goes back to that original point that we're saying, that the whole way to understand the laws of Mishpatim is to understand that there's a soul that came into this world for a correction. And this correction that this soul came into the world for this correction is manifested through life experiences. So like I said, like we said before, the house you were raised in, the neighborhood you're raised in, the social, economic conditions, all the different things that made up the society, the reality that you lived in, were designed specifically by God. Even if a person has certain challenges, say intellectual challenges, emotional challenges, physical challenges, whatever those things, elements, all those things were given to you as a gift from God, because you're only in this world to correct your soul. And so we're seeing that the laws of Mishpatim, this idea of Mishpatim, as it relates to the system of laws that God gave us to connect to him through his creation, we're dealing with the idea of the laws between man. So these laws that were given to man were also given as an additional tool to allow us to respond to the world, the reality that God has given us to correct our soul. So the neighborhood that I grew up in, the family that I grew up in, the friends that I lived around, the enemies that I lived around, the leadership I lived around, the belongings that I possess, everything, everything that I've experienced was all here for me to correct myself. So God gives us a set of laws. God gives us a set of laws to be able to correct ourselves. That's the whole point of this year. The main point of this year is for us to open this conversation and to see that when God gives us a law on how to deal with, respecting human property, respecting the human body, not just ours, other people. When God gives us a law for the justice in transfer of property and services, like when you work for people, these different things. God gave us a law because he wanted that particular experience to be an experience that connected us to him and his benevolence and his light, his kedusha, his ruchnius. So that experience, being connected to God, allows us to achieve the purpose of why God gave us that experience. In the same way, even when we eat food, right? We say brachot over food. Why? Because it's not that we're just eating food. We're utilizing that food to, for sure, nourish our body and even nourish our soul, but to correct our soul to be able to be connected to God fully. And this is the same things about the laws that we were given. So when we see the Torah and we see these different things that Hashem asks us to do as Jewish people, then we have to say to ourselves, why? Why do I have to follow so many laws and other people don't? Because when you look at the moral and ethical standard of the world, how much of it has been improved since the Torah came into this world? How many societies have created laws? When you think about the American legal system, for example, it definitely has its issues, but the laws themselves were a response to British Commonwealth law. That's where the American legal system comes from. The whole idea of judges, the whole idea of witnesses, the whole idea of trials, all this is from the Torah. how to deal with people, how to deal with property, how to deal with stolen issues. All that came from the Torah. But the British Commonwealth law was created by priests, people who were priests, like Christian priests. But they learned those laws from the Talmud. They studied the Talmud. They learned from Jews. In the legal system for most of the world today, and I'm talking about specifically Western society, is a byproduct of the Talmud, the Mishnah and the Gemara. That's what it is. Like if you open the Mishnah, you know, when you look at the books of Nezikin, right? You have the laws of damages, the laws of property, you have the laws of everything in the physical world that can be transferred and acquired. Anything that has to do with that space, the Masechtas go over all these things. It goes over them in depth. So the point is saying is not to look at the laws of the Torah from the standpoint of, you know, obligations and rules, but more so to look at it from the standpoint of this is exactly the system in the way that I should interact with the world that was given to me to correct my soul. So with that being said, we're going to go into a Ben Ish Chai Halakha, and we're going to like try to, the shiurim that we go forward are going to be shorter because we want to just really hone in, unless there's discussion, we want to really hone in on this idea of understanding subjects, right? And instead of going super in depth at this stage, this is deal with the broad concept, because this understanding the broad concept introduces us to a whole new world. You can't introduce someone to a whole new world and tell them about the details of the whole world in the same conversation. So right now we're going to deal with Mishpatim. The next year we're going to deal with Chukim, and then after that we're going to deal with Mitzvot. And so we're going to have a clear understanding from the Rabbi Hirsch's perspective on these laws and how they fit into the world. Shalom, shalom, shalom. Okay. So in closing, we are we're learning one of the halakha from the Ben Ish Chai, and the halakha of the Ben Ish Chai is in this area. He's talking about the laws of priestly blessings. Okay, and so Ben Ish Chai says the wording of the priestly blessing that's in Bar Midbar 632. It says in English, it says, "Thus shall you bless the children of Israel, and say to them." So Ben Ish Chai is saying the term "say to them" implies that the Kohanim should be prompted before reciting it. The words "say to them" may be interpreted to mean that not only Aaron and his descendants should recite the blessings for the Jewish people, but also that they should be prompted by the recipients of the blessings before reciting it. So there's different ways that we can learn this halakha, but the way that I want to explain it is from what we learned earlier. The Kohanim giving us a blessing, doing our tefillah at a specific time, and reminding us of the times when the Beis Hamikdash, when it was the whole tribe of the Kohanim were doing this for the Jewish people and in essence the whole world, is that the Kohanim, this Halakhot could remind us of the fact that the laws and the system that God has given to them, has given the laws in the system that God has given to Bnei Israel was a blessing, because the Jewish soul has this ability through the rules, through the system of the Halakhot, through the 613 connections to Hashem, that the Jewish people have this ability to correct their neshama, that they have the ability to correct their soul. And so this blessing is a reminder of why we were created in the first place. We came in this world in the first place to correct our soul. We came into this world to have a series of experiences that challenged us, that gave us ups and downs, and gave us success and failures, great opportunities, heartbreaks, all these different things that correct us. And not only that, we were given a set of rules that allows us to understand how to connect to this world of correction through these series of opportunities. And so when the Kohanim are blessing us, they're reminding us. But he says something unique. The people should be prompted. The Kohanim should be prompted by the recipients of the blessing before reciting it. Meaning that the congregation itself is the reason why the blessing exists in the first place. The congregation itself is the reason why this bracha is giving over. In that same way, the Jewish people are the ones who prompted Hashem to bring a Torah into this world. And so with that being said, that we should continue on and to re-examine the Torah and to re-examine the simplicity of the Torah and re-examine the sages of our Torah to get more clarity on why we came into this world, what our purpose is, what makes us unique, and what is the proper way to contribute to humanity. Baruch atah Adonai. Well, perfect. No, we thought we were getting out of here easy. Perfect.
Yeah, I just wanted to.
You need your soup? Go ahead.
Just a clarity, because when I say I came to Israel, when I say I came to Israel, I'm referring you to me as a human.
Yeah.
When I say a human, flesh and blood,
Yes.
spirit within me.
Yeah.
Is it how we came to this world?
Yeah. You're saying how did we?
Is it how we came to this world?
As a human.
Yeah.
You asked me, is that how we came into this world?
Yes. Because when I say I came to Israel, well, I came into any city.
Yeah.
This it's a composite of flesh and blood.
Yeah.
And the soul within it.
Yes.
Now, I'm using the same word. I came to this world.
Yes.
Does it have the same?
I would say that we came into this world as a soul that utilized the human experience to correct itself. So being a human being is only an expression of this soul's desire to correct itself.
We have learned that there are three aspects to the existence of. One is called nefesh shechri.
Okay.
The nature of this nefesh shechri, 613.
Mm-hmm.
That's nature.
Mm-hmm.
We have got another level called nefesh yesodi, and we have got the guf. So the nefesh yesodi is where all the moral ethics, preferences, dislike, and so forth are much more centered.
Yeah.
Now, the first, before that, the third one is the guf.
Yes.
So all these two levels must get into the body.
Okay.
Now, it says the nefesh shechri is like being lent. The nefesh yesodi. So, but the one who learned it expected back clean as it came.
Oh, wow.
Just like your analogy, if I lend you a car, in the very state that I gave it to you, you are expected to return it in the same way. Probably much more better. My question is, when I said I came, who is really talking here? Because I came to find myself in the world of mud.
Yeah.
That could soil me out. Who is this?
You know, the thing about this idea of the soul coming in, the aspect of the soul that comes in this world had prior existences.
Yes.
And these prior existences ultimately was the entity that shaped what was the correct place and time. The soul already, like you're saying, the soul already comes in with a certain amount of information. Right? So you're asking me to work off the pendulum of Nefesh Yehudi and Nefesh of Yesod. Yeah?
Yeah, I just want to, if Rabbi Hirsh has clarified it for us, because an ignorant person like I am, when I'm hearing Rabbi Hirsh telling me, we came into this world to repair. That little I know is little bit in knowledge known by a layman like myself. I would ask myself, which one do I repair?
It's not just repair, it's also to repair, to complete, and also to connect. So there is an aspect of us that's damaged, that we came to repair. There's another aspect of us that we come to complete, meaning that the soul had more work to do, more mitzvot, whatever. And then there's an aspect of the soul that wants or has this desire to connect to Hashem directly. The aspect of the soul, I think these are the three parts you're talking about, right? So this aspect of the soul that comes into the world damaged is a part that we have series of life experiences to be able to, in a way, give us opportunities to correct, or opportunities to do tshuva. So if a person had a prior life where, say they had a certain types of set of experiences with women, in this lifetime, they'll come back in this aspect of creation. Then there's this aspect of the mitzvot, right? This aspect of mitzvot, which is this idea of like learning, education, right? This is the aspect of it, the soul coming in this world to fulfill certain obligations that God has given to them through action, right? And then we have another aspect, which is the spiritual man, right? The spiritual man, which is this man that has this aspect of the soul, which is wants to become one with Hashem and connect to one with Hashem. And so there's different stages in one's life. Like say if a person was not, say if a person was a ger, for example, or bought tshuva, Horeb, but I'm saying a ger. They lived a life that was connected to this idea of responding to experiences. Then there was another aspect once they did the conversion, which is this idea of through knowledge, through wisdom, right? Yehudi, right? And then they had another aspect of this life, which once they grow, maybe they go into the soul, maybe they become a spiritual leader, a teacher, whatever. And then from that standpoint, they connect directly to Hashem. I don't know if that answers the question because I'm not so familiar with that matrix, but from what I heard from you, that's the way I would explain. Does that answer the question at all? Or maybe not, maybe it does. But you're saying what part do you correct? I would say there's different aspects of correction. There's different aspects. One correction is it's not like for example, they say during the Pesach, right? Pesach is a time of Devekis, Simcha, this whole thing, right? And it's very communal. Then you move into the Omer. The Omer is about tshuva, it's about transformation, it's about gaining more knowledge, keeping count of the Omer, this whole experience. And then it tops off at this experience of Shavuot. which is this idea of receiving Matan Torah, which is access to all the knowledge and complete complex connection to Hashem. So maybe the matrix that you have with these three aspects of building of the man through the neshama, maybe you could connect those three different levels to the concept of Pesach to Shavuot. Anything else? No. Baruch atah Adonai, le'olam v'amen v'amen.
Amen.